Hey, Scott, it's Friday. It's time for another transformation conversation. This is a summer edition, if you will. Happy July. This episode, episode 8, is Cloud Technology and the Art of Integration. So in speaking to a number of bankers who are looking at or implementing various cloud-based applications, whether it be for CRM, for loan origination, for other things, they're having some anxiety about them. And I think, in terms of how they're going to manage all of those and really how they're going to leverage and utilize those applications. And I think they're thinking about it in a more, traditional sense, thinking each is a silo. But I guess at a high level, what I wanted to ask is, does cloud technology enable, easier application integration sort of across all of these solutions?
It does, and there are probably three main things when we talk about integrating cloud applications. One is proximity of systems. Why is this different from the old siloed architectures? We know, and I wouldn't say love, but proximity of systems, right? So if we have everything living in one data center, call that the cloud. I know I'm kind of doing some arm waving here, but things become a little easier because now I'm not having to transfer from network A to network B. Yes, there's a logical change in network, but physical network, we're in the cloud. We've got the super highways of connectivity there. So transferring information, while it's still a thing that needs to be dealt with, it's much easier. And then there's the adopted standards of integration. Sometimes we hear of RESTful services, API contexts and locations. So, instead of us sitting behind an MQ series or whatnot, we're now collaborating on a more common standard with APIs and those types of things using RESTful web type request response. At the same time, though, the old patterns of integration still hold true. There are still the enqueuings, publish, subscribing types of integration connectivity that's happening. It's just that the standards have been more codified, as well as the proximity of solutions are closer together.
Okay. So it sounds to me like, while the technology is still sort of, the underlying integration technology is still in place, it's been sort of abstracted in a sense, so that it's not as difficult to work with. So this, and this leads to a question we actually had someone send in, and the question was, can multiple disparate cloud applications be combined into a single user experience? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's an age-old question. That's a good question. Yes and no. So it depends. It depends on the utility of the cloud application. So a UX-focused application can integrate disparate API-based systems that pull it all together. Obviously, that's the age-old, single sign-on conundrum. Sure, we can single sign-on to multiple applitions, but the user experience is really within that other siloed application. What gets very interesting is that if I have a non-UI based capability that I can access via APIs, and I have this common user interface that's pulling all that feature function together, that's a win. And that comes right at the last genesis of that were portals and those types of things. The emergent challenge right now is managing all the APIs, and it can be very overwhelming to the uninitiated. I know you said anxiety. That's a great term. We've been talking to a lot of financial institutions that have some of that API anxiety. So it's a brave new world, and that brings forth new challenges. It's better, but operational groups within organizations, they're going to need to adapt to new patterns if they're going to attempt to pull it all together. Now, this, of course, can be a huge benefit if you have a provider that's doing all those API integrations for you on behalf of the financial institution, if you will. So, managing APIs, managing all of that stuff, as you know, Joe, we're hearing a lot of feedback of like, oh my gosh, now it's just API everywhere. And there's also a whole lot of eye rolling nowadays when it's like, oh, well, there's an API to integrate with. Well, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that too.
Okay. So I guess, another question would be, because it sounds like cloud technology does sort of put a layer of insulation, if you will, around the business user, so they're not
Yeah.
quite as exposed to the raw technology. But does cloud computing provide a greater level of data and processing virtualization?
So yes. So I think about that in pipelining as a term, because that processing pipeline can become a more strategic design versus a tactical one, if you will. So capacity in both storage and processing power, because there's a lot of that in the cloud. And we can, there's that elasticity of those resources. I can bring more to bear, or I can kind of throttle it back if I don't have as much to process. But that mitigates some of the limiting factors that we've traditionally faced with, the how and the how much. So the obvious construct here would be, artificial intelligence, AI, right? And AI isn't magic, of course, right? It's the ability to process an intense amount of data. We can derive some algorithms that can be used to predict outcomes, or right, the ability to process, fractal amounts of data points in an effort to respond to an event or something like that. The former would take a nod from the tried and true scientific method that we know and love, sprinkle some marketing around that and the utility of that capability, put a bunch of capital behind it and fun graphics, and you have all the AI stuff that we're all being blasted with. And that's there. That's absolutely, one of the benefits of all of this, being able to process more and faster. The less obvious concept, I go back to kind of what we started talking about, is proximity. So just, go with me for a second here. When you think about motherboard and cache architectures, right? Physical architectures, physical distances between memory and the CPU led to buffering solutions. Memory was always physically close to the CPU so that we could move data. Things are still physical when we're moving data. So more and more, there was faster data processing. Then we got into parallel processing, the whole Intel business chip model, ad nauseum. So zoom out of that concept and now add our context to it insofar as, customer and bank. And because they're in closer proximity, speed would be the first thing to come to mind, right? Well, because we're both in the cloud, I can really, rip stuff back and forth quickly. But some of the less obvious things is the other modalities in that whole stack. So think about security. Whenever I take in information from one environment and move it to the next environment, I've got to encrypt that. I've got to encapsulate that. I've got to send it across the wire. I've got to decapsulate. I've got to decrypt it. So, with that not having to be in place, I can now be transfer and processing data in a much more intense manner, which allows me to extend my capabilities and provide new innovations that before were constricted due to disparate systems.
Great. Well, what a great topic. And obviously we could talk about it for hours, but we're going to leave it there for now. But, in the context of commercial digital banking, we believe that value-added products and services can be created and leveraged, using cloud integration. We're going to cover that in our next episode. We're going to get into concepts like unified data stores and the like. But again, thank you for watching. If you're watching on the website, please feel free to leave a comment. If you're watching it on LinkedIn, feel free to comment or make suggestions or ask questions and the like. Other than that, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Happy Friday.